long time ago, a single man with horrible face scars from the Great Revolver War, who tricked 515 people into subscribing into his channel, managed to listen to Dark Side of the Moon and was hooked with prog music. He eventually met the final chapter for Floyd fans when they realized Pink Floyd had other music than the Education song and the one with the Sid guy, and moved on with his life to other music such as Pedestrian Deposit? Who hijacked the script? What the fuck? This is not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to talk about Can. After his Quadrophenia video got blocked in 239 countries, all apart from the United States, he has set out on a journey to find a new video idea for his 10th review, since he wanted a grand spectacle for the number 10. This video is made by that man, Sir Lord Griss of the 77, renowned hentai connoisseur, and huge ELP Kraftwerk and Steve Reich fan. Music for 18 musicians, music for 18 musicians, music for 18 musicians, music for 18 musicians, music for 18 musicians.
Hello, check.
2021 has been a great year for my music taste. In my previous year, I discovered a lot of the traditional prog bands, such as Yes and Genesis, and was really hooked on listening to more albums rather than singles and such. To give a comparison, this year I've heard probably more albums than I have any other year. And when you hear new stuff every day, you're bound to hear something you're really gonna love. Which is why I'm gonna dedicate this video to krautrock, the new genre I discovered pretty much at the start of this year in January, and was almost instantly hooked on the genre. If you're a longtime Griss fan, or as we like to say, Grissers, you would know I like Kraftwerk a lot, and so that helped me a little to get into Can. However, of course, Kraftwerk are a bit on the edge if they're actually krautrock or not. Their early stuff, which I actually hadn't heard until this year, is definitely krautrock, but their electrical stuff isn't really. But either way, I had heard their live 1970 show, Rockpalast? German show, and thought, okay, so they did some experimental stuff in the beginning of their career, cool. And later found out that it was krautrock. But enough about my story of being familiar with krautrock. It's time for Can. I had actually heard about Can all the way back in early 2020 when I was hearing Yes for the first time, which seems like forever ago. And I even believe I heard Moonshake, but Last FM claims I never did, which I thought was weird, but alright, fast forward to 2021, and I was hyped to listen to some krautrock. I thought it was gonna be the new fresh start for all the prog I'd heard up until then, and I'd have to say it didn't disappoint. So I made a list simply titled Krautrock that had three of the most famous krautrock artists: Can, Neu, and Amondil 2? Amondil? Amondil 2. Yeah. I was debating whether to do the Neu discography review like this, but in the end, I settled on Can. And that's the story of how we ended up here. Now, I also have to mention before this video starts, I'm not going to go in depth about the krautrock movement in the 70s. Frankly, I don't think I could cover it that well, but because it's very important to understand krautrock to understand the Can, and what they do, I'm going to summarize it as best as I can. So in late 1968, music was going through changes. As many people have noticed, artists were moving away from the early 60s blues and jazz influenced music to move towards the new psychedelic movement that was taking an effect. Artists focused more on albums instead of making an album with 12 single songs on it with no connections. Concept albums became a thing, and albums started to have meanings, like protest albums for the Vietnam War, for example. However, 99% of this scene takes place in the United Kingdom and the United States. Of course, there are exceptions, but that's where most people listened and made psychedelic music. And so, in the middle of the scene, Germany, who didn't really have a scene and focused on their own genre, Schlagerpop. However, what this boils down to is that the people who would come up with krautrock were trying to give Germany their own sound. They thought Schlagerpop was just imported from the West, and so they saw that music was changing, and so they wanted something new that was unique to Germany. And thus, the krautrock movement started, and the most famous band to come out of the krautrock movement was Can. The word krautrock comes from a British radio station that I'm too lazy to fact check what it was called. Anyways, it noticed the ongoing people in Germany who made crazy experimental music and called it krautrock. Kraut coming from the German you would say Kraut in the World War II, I think, something like that. Pshah. So what we can take away from all this is that Can's goal was to create a new genre unique to Germany, which explains a lot, in my opinion, of the music they were trying to do. If you want an actual good explanation of krautrock, I suggest you search up a krautrock documentary. There are plenty on YouTube, and the one I watched was the one made by the BBC. It's just about an hour long, so it's not terrible. It's very factual and covers a lot of what is happening and why it is happening. It's got facts such as the time Brian Eno made a visit to Harmonia and got some tapes as a gift of what they did, which would cause a decades long discussion on unknown musical forums if David Bowie's Heroes is a krautrock influenced album or not. But enough about the krautrock rambles, because it's time for Can and only.
It is I, the can hater.
Nah, you can't do that. What do you mean? What? I mean, you can't wear that mask. It's an inside joke. At best, 20 people are gonna understand.
Oh, fine, fine, fine. Wait up.
I'll wait.
Unbelievable. It is I, the can hater.
Oh no! It's the Can Hater!
Yes, yes. And I have come to hate Can. That's right. Can sucks. Can is terrible. I don't know what to tell you. Can sucks.
Alright, thank you for interrupting the show. See you around.
All right. Yes. I'll see you around. Yeah. See you around. Yeah. Bye.
Okay, look, Can isn't exactly immune to criticism because of trying to create a new genre. I get that. But in my opinion, it's better to understand what they were trying to do than to simply brush off their song or album as it sucks. Same goes for a lot of other krautrock bands like Faust. They wanted to create something completely new, and as well, in my opinion, they succeeded. I just feel it's important as a first listen to keep an open mind, and if you don't like their style, that's fine. And no, I'm not talking to anyone in particular. I'm saying, in general, brushing off their musical style as bad out of the gate is the wrong approach. Now, is that enough backstory? Can we, move on with the review? No? Oh, okay, we gotta talk about the musical style. So, Can have a couple of genre influences, just a few. Most notably, jazz, and what I like to focus on, jam band. And yes, I will call jam band a genre, so be quiet. The way Can recorded their albums was a jam session that they would pick out the highlights from and put it on an album. This often led to a lot of footage being unused, and some managed to also be highlighted and put on Can the Lost Tapes. But most of it was also put in a vault, somewhere. Either way, I would consider Can a jam band, trying to do some experimental stuff, and you could also see this on their live recordings, where they would improvise all their songs, like Spoon, which they turned from a single into a 30-minute monster. There are upsides with this approach to music, but I've also noticed it can lead to a lot of different opinions on what album and what songs are the best. Because it's a jam band, you're basically rolling the dice if you know how much you're gonna like a song or an album. Because when it's all improvised and highlighted, the structure of the songs aren't gonna look like a well crafted song such as Stairway to Heaven, with bridges, solos, and verses. It's a continuous machine that improvs and jams, which makes a lot of opinions subjective. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is exclusively a bad thing. Variety is good, but when you have 10 songs that could potentially take the top spot for the best Can song and another 6 albums that could also claim the number 1 spot, it can be hard to form an opinion on such variety. What song is the best? What album is the best? What tracks don't I like? And what tracks have a great performance? Okay, we're getting way too sidetracked here again. What I mean by all this is that Can have a very unique musical style, I'd say anyway, that makes it hard to form an opinion on, combined with being experimental and potentially scaring off newcomers. I like their jam band approach and making highlights, but I could also see how that turns off a lot of people from their music, who would rather want more familiar song structures. Okay, too many big words. Can we get on with the review? No? Okay, one more thing. For this review, I'm going to review the first 5 Can albums: Monster Movie soundtracks, Togomogo, Egbamiasi, and Future Days. And as a bonus, I'm going to do Delayed as well, which is their first album they made that never got released because no record company wanted to publish the album. So they shelved it, and many years later, they remastered it and released it officially. So that's where we're going to start and move our way up chronologically. Chronologically. I'm sorry for all the diehard Can fans asking why I'm not doing Suno or Babaluma or any of the other albums, or heck, even a live album like a bootleg or something that comes after 73. And that is for a few reasons. One, I don't have a lot of time to make these videos. I would like to keep it condensed. Two, it's hard to form an opinion on, I'd say, pretty average or below average music. It's just not fun for anyone if I go on and on about an album that has nothing special going on about it. 5 out of 10. However, there is a light in the tunnel. One day I might review something like Out of Reach, which I do hate, in fact. And I also wanted to do a Lost Tapes review, so that might come in the future. But for now, I want to focus on these 6 albums. Kicking off the Sixology, we have Delayed, which, as I said, was the technical first Can album. Released in 1968, it's pretty unique for its time considering the way they were just starting out. It's pretty impressive they managed to create this in the little time they had before moving on and recording a Monster Movie. The album kicks off with Butterfly, which is a great 8-minute track. Followed by the short Pnoom. We have 19th Century Man, which is pretty okay. It feels like they were going for a single of sorts here, but it just doesn't really work. It is then followed by the best song on the album, Thief. Delay for me is pretty easy to form an opinion on because there isn't a lot of amazing stuff to pick from on the album. Thief has great drums, which is a very common thing you're gonna see throughout the rest of their discog. After listening to their entire discography a few times, I wouldn't hesitate to call Jackie Liebeseat the best drummer, and this track really feels like it started it all. Combined with Malcolm's vocals, they seem highly emotional in the song, and just overall, it's probably the best on Delayed. This is then followed by Man Named Joe, which has an amazing intro, but Malcolm's vocals just are not for me on this one. It's just his high-pitched voice just doesn't really fit. That said, really great intro though. Uphill is definitely a mixed bag. It's got some great performances here and there, but it's got lots of filler in my opinion, which is a trend I get to see on the next album as well, Monster Movie. And to finish the album off, we get The Little Star of Bethlehem, which is just like Butterfly. It's also fantastic, and it's got a great closer. Overall, this debut is really unique for its time in 1968, considering this time when the music industry was changing a lot. It's pretty unimaginable that it didn't get accepted by a single record company. I guess this is where you put the quote, "I guess you guys aren't ready for that yet, but your kids are gonna love it." Actually, change the part from love to like, because this album, overall, 6.3 out of 10. Great debut, but it's not perfect. The album feels more like a bonus album for when you're finished the entire discography, similar to Right Time, but it's actually good, unlike Right Time. Now we move on to Monster Movie. So, released the following year in 1969, this is often the debut that people are talking about most, and it's not hard to see why. For lots of people, it's even their favorite Can album, but I'm not the same. Kicking off the album, we get Father Cannot Yell, which hooked me right into the album the first time I heard it. That Ehrman Schmidt keyboard and the drum starting with the Holger's bass is just glorious, truly gourmand for Can fans. Mwah. Followed by Malcolm's vocals, this really sets the mood or the feeling you're gonna get from the entire album. One of the things I'd like to comment for the whole album is Malcolm's lyrics, which definitely have a poetic feeling on this album. The song then goes from lyrics and Malcolm turns into an instrument that follows the band. And And just overall, Father Cannot Yell, great track and opening and introduction to Can. Next track, we got Mary Mary, which really, again, great Malcolm performance, and the wailing guitars on this makes the song feel very powerful. Also, if I couldn't praise it enough, the drums is the spice on top of it all. Outside My Door is probably the only mixed feeling song on the album. It's like I said before with Delay, some great performances here and there, but I just can't really get myself to like it all that much. It really just feels underwhelming, and it just really feels like a connection to the next song, which coincidentally is probably a top 5 Can song, You Do Right. There is a lot to talk about in a 20-minute epic such as this. Up until now, Can didn't really make a track that really showed all of their potential as a jam band, but they changed that with You Do Right. Apparently taken from a 6-hour jam session the band did, You Do Right was cut down to 20 minutes, and it's a fantastic showing of their true capabilities as a band. Malcolm's voice becomes very hypnotic, as is documented. He sings in a mantra voice that combined with the tribal drums and Michael Corley's guitar, which sounds incredibly strange at times, making the song feel even more engaging, almost as if you'd wish it was longer. And also added, the jam band approach makes the song slowly shift, making the song feel fresh, and it gives the band plenty of opportunities to solo and do fills. It's definitely one of Can's best songs, and a textbook krautrock song as well. Also, one thing that is kind of interesting is the album cover. On later repressings, the album featured this Galactus holding a gun, but originally it was a red circle with the name of the artist and the band. The font also looks like one of those classic 40s or 50s intro cards you'd see in films, which is cool. Also, on both covers, the album features the original name, The Can, and not just Can, which the band would go on to use for all their later albums. Also, as a side note, before the Can, the band was also called the Inner Space, but some of the members got switched, so they went for the Can instead, and then Can. Overall, Monster Movie is an excellent album, and a great debut, despite not being the debut. 7.2 out of 10. Great stuff. You Do Right is fantastic. Nothing to hate, really. Just a really great album. Okay, now before I talk about soundtracks, there's one thing I gotta talk about, and that is the motoric beat. This is a krautrock video after all, so it has to be done. Now, the motoric beat is something very common in the krautrock genre. Now, keep in mind, I'm not a drummer nor an expert musician, and I highly recommend you watch someone else explain it. Offbeat made a great 5-minute video explaining it, but the purpose of the motoric beat is that it has great improvisation potential. The way Jockey used it in Can, or Yaki. The way Yaki used it, is it Jockey or York? Yorkie. The way Jackie used it. The way Jackie used it in Can was really perfect, and in my opinion made him have a complete freedom over what to do with his drums. He had a steady motoric beat and just follow the band with the drum improvs along the way, which would give them great material they could highlight and just cut together. It's almost a real groove you get with all its synchronized rhythms going on and slowly shifting as the song or the songs progresses. Now, what I mean by this is the following album has some incredible drum playing, and I wanted to explain a little why. The same goes for Monster Movie, of course. It's also got an incredible rhythm throughout its album, especially on You Do Right. Now, with that said, it's time for soundtracks. Just like the title says, this album includes songs that Can recorded for movies between 1968 and 1970, and it's the first album to feature the new singer for the band, Damon Tsuki, or Tsuki. And it's really crazy how he joined the band.
We played live in Munich, had a concert there, which was a sold-out concert. And I was sitting in the afternoon with Jackie Liebetzeit, with the drummer, in a cafe. And suddenly I saw someone coming up the street, in the middle of the street, and were praying to God and getting down to the street and behaving very strange. And I said to Jackie, Jackie, we have our new singer.
They found him on the street? They found him on the street. They just, it's my new band member. But, anyways, this means that the album has two singers, each getting about half the songs on the album. Soundtracks marked a bit of a switch in the Can musical style, where they focused on more experimental music and moved away from their more psychedelic style in the 60s, particularly on Mother Sky and She Brings the Rain. But I've gotta say, this album feels very weird. It's like the album is unfinished, or no, I should say it feels more like it's missing something. After Soundtracks, the band would move on to more concept-based album, where they had a particular set musical style, like focusing on crazy, often high-pitched music on Tagomago, and famously their ambient style music for Future Days. But Soundtracks is missing that piece, and because of that, it feels really all over the place. With that said, there are still some great tracks on here, starting off with Deadlock. It seems Soundtracks has great guitar intros, and Deadlock is no different. But overall, the track is pretty okay. I wouldn't call it an all time favorite at least. We then move on to Tongo Whiskey Man. It's the same we find on Delay. Some great performances here and there, but at the same time, it's more like filler. And I just can't stress enough why I dislike Deadlock Instrumental so much. It's the same song, but with no vocals, and it's cut in half. Awful. It shouldn't really be here. Don't Turn the Light On is a great change of pace, however, and it's a good track. The first track, Damo, recorded with the band, isn't so bad. Skipping Soul Desert, which is a pretty mediocre song. I can't even bring myself to like Malcolm's vocals all that much. Alright, so maybe I've been a little negative so far on Soundtracks. It's definitely got some good performances, but they aren't all excellent when you put it on an album together. However, that all changes now, because we've got Mother Sky, and my god, it has one of the best guitar intros I've ever heard. The meteoric beat on this song brings it all together on a whole new level. It gives all the band members a chance to shine, and even Damo on vocals is doing a killer job. Also, just like with the album Fresh Cream, Mother Sky has about a couple versions, just a few. First, there is a 12-minute version skipping the entire guitar intro, which, what are you doing? You're basically ruining the entire song. Then there's the single mix, Can did, which, in my opinion, doesn't really work as a single, but I could see people liking it. And of course, the best version is on here, the 14-minute Mother Sky in all its glory. Also, most likely one of Can's top songs. We then get one of Can's most famous songs, She Brings the Rain, the last ever performance for Malcolm Mooney. Well recorded. And if you have that in the back of your head, it almost makes the song a little more emotional. It might be Malcolm's best vocal performance as well. With that said, the song is pretty unique for Can's discography, featuring basically no jockey on the track. Jockey. But it doesn't feel like it's missing him. Definitely not. This is a slow-paced single with some cool effects at the end.
Yes, I care if she brings me spring, but don't care about nothing. She brings the rain.
Overall, Soundtracks is a bit of a black sheep in the Can discography, but it's a welcomed one. 7 out of 10. Mother Sky and She Brings the Rain kinda carries the album on its back, to be honest. After Soundtracks, something changed with Can, so because I'm lazy, I'm gonna read this Teroscope interview Can did that I found on Genius. Pretend I have a paper, I forgot to bring the paper with me, so... Togomogo is a magical work. Before Jockey came to Can, he was trying to commit suicide. He was playing with Chet Baker in Barcelona as a jazz drummer. Then he went to Ibiza? And south of that island is a rock called Togomogo. Mogo means magic, and Togo was the name of the magic master who lived there. And Jockey was on that rock and tried to spring down because he thought his life didn't make any sense. I think he was the one who said we should call it Tagomago. With this incredible story, the band made possibly one of the best albums of all time. Tagomago, released in 1971, is an experimental masterpiece with possibly one of the most abstract concepts on an album. Now, the way the album is structured, you have side A and side B, which is the deteriorating mental stage, and then after Hallelujah, you get the Aum, which is where the album turns into insanity. And that's often why Tagomago is both loved and hated by pretty much everyone who hears the album. I, for one, am a huge fan of this album, and I think it's Can's best, but not everyone is going to agree on that, and it's fully understandable. The album starts off with Paper House, which I would consider the 21st century schizoid man of Can's discography. Similarly to Father Cannot Yell, this track is possibly the best introduction to an album, setting the entire atmosphere for what is about to come, similarly to 21st century schizoid man, especially when it comes to fantastic riffs and climaxes. The 4-minute mark is my favorite part in the song, and I think it really shows just what the album is capable of. Damo's vocals are so intense, it's like he's guiding you through the song and the rest of the album. And of course, Paper House has a great transition into the next track, Mushroom.
So much ahead. We're so much ahead.
This apocalyptic track has an incredible drum pattern combined with the single notes played on the bass by Holger Kosutki and an amazing Damo performance. This is a fantastic track, continuing the descent into madness. It then ends with a nuke going off as it transitions to the next track on the album, Oh Yeah. They started to use some tape loops for some of the instruments and playing Damo's vocals backwards, and about halfway through, we get Japanese vocals from Damo, which I always wanted to hear. And I think it adds to the chaotic album, making it feel like you can understand what he's saying, but you just can't make out what it means. You know, it's got this sense of unease in the song.
一人でそこに座ってる頭のいかれたやつ
Finishing the track off with a fade out, and we move on to the best Can track, Hallelujah, the last stop before the album turns into insanity. Now, Hallelujah, I think, has it all. The definitive Can track. It has incredible drums on it, one of the best bass lines performed by Holger, and a high pitched guitar fading in and out alongside Earman's minimal keyboard work with quite possibly Damo's best vocal performance. We get the amazing avant garde funk influenced song that is Hallelujah. Now, one thing the song does that is really cool is that the bass line and the drums aren't in sync until the 12-minute mark or so, when the song starts to build for a climax. This makes the song highly engaging, and in my opinion, it adds a groove to the song, making it feel all the more epic. Also, I would like to point out that listening to the single mix song is a crime. It's just like listening to the single version of Autobahn. It's just wrong. Around the 5-minute mark or so, the song also completely switches to a calm section before restarting again, which is also an epic moment for the album. If you want to listen to one Can track, this is what you should go for, in my opinion. And after Hallelujah, we descend into madness. The next song, Aumg, features vocals from Irmin Schmidt, and it's definitely one of the most experimental songs on the album. The song doesn't really have a structure, it just fades in and out with drum patterns, bass lines, and ambient sound effects, most of which performed by Irmin on the keyboard. The Aum sound also becomes darker and heavier as the song progresses, which really symbolizes and shows just how we turn crazy. Towards the end of the song, Jackie starts pounding away on his drums, making it feel like you're running away from something and adding stress to the track. It's almost frightening, actually. And then it stops, and possibly the single reason why Tagomago is hated starts playing. Pekingo. Now, I really can't do justice for Pekingo by explaining it. It's a track you have to hear in order to understand. Now, yes, it might be highly experimental, but I think that that is the charm of it. Because we must remember that this is supposed to be a concept of going insane, and I can't think of a better way to symbolize insanity than to do something as experimental as this. It might be highly experimental, but in my opinion, it fits the album well, and it does its job better than possibly any other track on the album, making it truly feel like you've gone insane. But again, this is really an opinion thing, and I'm pulling the card of respect the art. So it really is in your hands if you like it or not, but personally, I like it. It makes the album feel more like an experience, rather than something you put on in the background and don't really pay much attention to. And that brings us to the final track, Bring Me Coffee or Tea, which to me is a bit of a disappointment. It doesn't really feel like a grand finish, it's more like, oh yeah, to be honest. Which makes the album feel a bit underwhelming in the end. But despite that, the track is pretty okay. But I don't think it's a great ending to the album. And that was the crazy album that is Togomongo. Personally, my favorite Can album, and probably one of my favorite albums of all time. Now, just like with the Doors debut, 9 out of 10. Fantastic album with one of the best and most abstract concepts I've ever heard. Great experience. We have come a long way, and it's time for possibly Can's most accessible album, 1972's Egg Bamiyasi. I've noticed lots of people find this album their favorite, and I could definitely see why. It's got their experimental style, but instead of the large scale 20-minute jam songs, where it either descends into madness or hypnotizes you, this album focuses more on single tracked songs and how they are structured. It probably also has the most famous Can songs like Vitamin C and I'm So Green and Soup. I think the main point to why people love the album so much is it's not over the top, it's canned at their best without being, over the top experimental, and combined with lots of the songs being structured like singles with verses and almost catchy drum patterns, makes it very accessible to a lot of new Can fans. Kicking off the album is probably the second most experimental song, just behind Soup, which is called Pinch. The intro is definitely a bit weak, especially compared to Togomongo and Monster Movie. It's like the album just starts as you turn it on, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but other than that, the song is really good. Since I'm a big fan of Can's more experimental catalog, this track feels great. Not much bad to say other than that. We then get the Swing Swan song, which adds a very soft side to the album that I also don't really have anything bad to say about. Great demo performance, and the jockey drums are slow paced, which makes the song feel even calmer. And I really like the Earman keyboard sound effects.
She's sucking, I'm again but happy as the days long.
One More Night has that great keyboard riff played throughout the song that is really, really nice. And as if I couldn't praise him enough, Jockey does his job great. Great guitar work as well. It feels like Michael made the guitar do some small fills instead of solos, which is cool. And then we get possibly the most famous Can song, Vitamin C. Now, what they did for this track, and I know this because I was in the studio, they had the tape recordings for all the instruments playing together, and they decided to just turn Jackie up to about 100% or so, and the rest of it turned down about 50%. From Dalmo, it's a bit more like 80%. They turn down from 100 to 80%. And this makes the song feel very fast. Also, it could also be that Jockey is playing fast, but and that works well in the single structure format the band was going for with Egg Bamiyasi. A real definitive Can song, though I'm not sure I'd put it in a top 10 Can songs of all time, but it's very close. Soup is definitely the most experimental on the album, but I wouldn't say that in a good way. For a long time, I've held a grudge against Soup. The song just feels very out of place for this album. After the 6-minute mark, I just can't like the part where they turn into noise artists while Damo sings gibberish. And I like Pekingo. How could you mess this up, Canned? It's not one of my favorites, and I can't bring myself to love it, but then luckily it has a great transition into the next song, I'm So Green. Which is also very similarly structured to Vitamin C and has great performances. From the band. This is how they should have made the album, filled with groovy single song performances without the experimental stuff like Soup. I think that would have made the album more consistent and probably more accessible to a lot of other people. And of course, they ended off with Spoon, which again, no complaints, though it's definitely not as disappointing of an ending as Coffee and Tea. Overall, this is not one of my personal favorite Can albums. I definitely don't like it as much as Togomago, but with that said, it has some great singles by Can that are really easy to pick up and play. Overall, 7.2. If on a good day, maybe 7.5. It's like Monster Movie. It's really good. We have come a long way, but it's finally time to end it off with possibly Can's most famous album, Future Days. Future Days is often praised as one of krautrock's best albums, and it's easy to see why. Just like with Can albums up until now, they have all had a specific jam sound that they were following. And like I said previously, Future Days focused on a more ambient style jam session that set the atmosphere for the album. Look no further than also one of Can's best songs, Future Days. It also has what I would consider one of Damo's best vocal performances, and in order to get that ambient atmosphere, Damo sounds like he's about 5 meters behind the microphone, almost as if he's singing through a radio or something. And then it fades in and out at times. Also, the sound effects of this really makes the song come together. Michael's guitar work feels really incredible with the small solos he does. The song also has one of Ermin Schmidt's best keyboard tracks, adding almost the entire ambient and light feeling the song produced, along with the sound effects, of course. Overall, Future Days makes you feel like you're walking on clouds in the air. Then we get Spray, which is possibly Can's best filler track, but man, that is so disappointing to say. The song fits incredibly well with the atmosphere for the album, but it has nothing going for it. The performances aren't the best, and it just feels like it's unfinished, like we could have gotten a lot better. That said, I'd take this over probably any other filler track by Can. All I can say is, Spray is okay. Moonshake is the single from the album, and an incredible one at that. I'm sure they noticed how incredible Vitamin C sounded with the drums turned up and decided they wanted to do it again for Future Days, which good on them. They made a track that was unique in its own way without basically pirating it from Vitamin C, or anything else on Egg Bamiasi for that matter. Combined with the wacky instrumental work at the minute-and-a-half mark, this song is great. And then we get possibly Can's second best song, Bel Air. And if I praised Future Days before for making you feel like you were walking on air, then this lacks in comparison to Bel Air. This song feels so incredibly calm. It's not as if you're just walking on air, but also appreciating the nature at the same time, especially after the 9-minute mark when the song plays field recordings before restarting again with the guitar riff from the intro. This is also a bit emotional considering this was Damo's last track recorded and his last track performed live before leaving the band. Sadly, Can could never quite live up to their expectations after this album, and soon fell into a string of mediocre albums, which is honestly really disappointing for a band with this much potential. But overall, Future Days is a real masterpiece of an album, with probably Can's best closer, Bel Air. 8.5 out of 10. Fantastic album. I loved it. And that is it for the Can discography. Some incredible albums that are incredibly unique in their musical approach, And also, thank you for making it this far into the video. If you like what I do, then please subscribe. It helps me out a lot. I would also like to know if you're a fan of this discography approach to doing a review. I thought it was fun to make. It was definitely tough, but I like challenges. So please, let me know if you enjoyed, and see you next time. And thus, Gris77 spent a long ass time and managed to make an excellent 10th episode, despite it being the 11th review he made. YouTube, if you're listening to me, I would just like to say your copyright system for music has problems, and please don't block this video worldwide when I upload it. Please, for the love of God.